So today I got part 7 of the Shadows of the Galaxy card review. As usual, the focus is on competitive, constructed play, so I'm going to dive right in. We got the first card here is Tarful. It's a 7-cost 3/9 Wookiee in Heroism. It's got Restore 2, and when a friendly Wookiee unit is dealt combat damage and isn't defeated, that unit deals that much damage to an enemy ground unit. It's a bit of a mouthful, but basically if something attacks one of your Wookiees and doesn't one-shot your Wookiee, the Wookiee will then immediately deal damage back to the attacker equal to however much damage they took. So I kind of get that the whole point here is to pair this with the Chewbacca leader. You play the Chewbacca leader, or this first, then flip the Chewbacca leader. Now anything that attacks Chewbacca and doesn't instantly defeat it, which is hard, it's got 9 health, will it basically instantly defeat itself, right? You like attack a 5/5 into Chewbacca, even though Chewbacca only has 2 power, the unit will deal 5 back to himself. And this is going to be basically true for anything that attacks Chewbacca, because they'll deal damage to themselves, plus however much damage Chewbacca will end up dealing back. I think the effect's pretty neat. I just think the card costing 7 is kind of the barrier for this being competitive. That's the one synergy I see being relevant. There aren't very many Wookiees in the game yet. There are a few more coming in this review, but most of them are pretty cheap. So I don't think this will be particularly effective with any of them. And again, he's effective with himself, but he doesn't have Sentinel, so there's kind of no reason anyone would really want to spend too much time attacking into a 3/9. But yeah, maybe with Chewbacca, although I think I'd rather still just be playing Luke Skywalker's and some better 7 drops. If you're playing green, you get U-Wing reinforcement. I don't think this is quite good enough. All right, next is Outlaw Corona. It's a flying frisbee. It's a 3/5. It costs 3. It's in green. It's got the Underworld trait, and it's a capital ship, so it's a very low-costed capital ship. And it's got a bounty on it that says, put the top card of your deck into play as a resource. So basically it ramps your opponent when the opponent defeats it. Now, granted, the stats on this are pretty strong, and maybe as a sideboard card to fight against aggressive space-based aggro decks, it might be okay. But I don't think the stats are quite amped up enough to basically have a bounty that loses you the game in many cases. I think letting your opponent ramp is one of the worst bounties we have seen so far on a unit, the worst downside bounty we've seen. We already see 3/4s in space, the Punishing One, or 3/2 with Shield as the 7th Fleet Defender. I don't think this is enough stat-wise better than those cards to have a game-losing bounty stapled onto it. It does have the Underworld trait, which is relevant with the yellow Underworld synergy stuff, but overall, not impressed. Only maybe if we're fighting weenie space decks will this ever be a useful card to kind of help stop the bleed there. All right, Kinton Intimidator is a 1-cost 1/4 in villain yellow. It also has the Underworld trait, so that is kind of relevant on a 1-cost unit. And it has an on-attack exhaust the defender. So it has to attack into whatever it wants to exhaust. Because it's a 1/4, it's probably not killing whatever it wants to exhaust. It might be killing itself. It's not a very strong unit, but it's a temporary stall effect. I don't think the card's very good. It is a 1-cost Underworld unit, which is a useful thing to have access to. I mean, Greedo, I think, is a special case in how good that card is as a 1-cost unit, especially with something like Cad Bane, where you get a ping for 1 with the card. But I think overall, this is not a particularly impressive effect and not a particularly impressive body, so likely not quite good enough. All right, Smuggler's Starfighter is a 3-cost 2/2 space unit, also with the Underworld tag. It has a when played, if you control another Underworld unit, give an enemy unit -3/-0 for this phase, and is a smuggle for 4. It's an understated space unit that gives a temporary debuff when played if you also control another Underworld unit. Again, it's not bad. It's just I think we have better options at this point, right? Like we have enough space units and cheap ones at that. You got in like yellow. You got in red. You got like Punishing One. You got 7th Fleet Defender. You got like Kylo's ship. You got Cartel Spacer. These are all cheap space units. With all of them have Underworld except 7th Fleet Defender, but I just don't know like how this would fit over any of those cards and some other ones. It does have Smuggle. Smuggle is a huge upside, and if anything is going to carry this card, it's that. The effect is okay. It like stalls damage for a turn. It's playing Disarm kind of on play, but the unit that it leaves behind, a 2/2 space unit, is very weak and not very impactful. All right. I don't know how to pronounce that first word. It's a Tree Tender that happens to be a Wookiee. It's a 3-cost blue unit. It's a 2/4 with grit. So, I mean, Wookiee, we've seen one card that has Wookiee synergy. I don't think this has particularly good synergy with Tarful. It's a 2/4 grit. Maybe Grand Inquisitor wants this. Probably still not. It would become a 4/2 on turn 2 that can attack. It's okay. I don't think this is very good. All right, we got a new leader, Fennec Shand. It's a yellow hero leader. She's a 5-cost deploy that comes in as a 4/4. On the leader side, there's an action that costs 1 and exhaust to play a unit that costs 4 or less from your hand and give it ambush for the phase. So you're basically paying 1 more than a unit would normally cost to give it ambush. On the unit side, she has Saboteur and then has action. So not on attack, it's an action. It doesn't happen when she attacks like a lot of leaders do. But play a unit that costs 4 or less and give it ambush. So in this case, you no longer have to pay the 1 tax. You just get to do it. Giving ambush is very strong in this game. This is similar to like the card Timely Reinforcements, which costs 1 to give a unit ambush. I think there's a few issues here. One, the biggest one probably, is that it stops at 4 or less. I think that's a huge issue for a leader like this because this ability is going to become way less impactful later in the game when you can't ambush your big units. You have to only resort to ambushing 4 less cost units. There are some good ones, like K2 is great with ambush. Even if you pay 5 for it, it's probably okay. Even things like Kanan, right? Like a 4/5. Would we pay 5 for a 4/5 ambush? I mean, we do sometimes. Like Bosk is that card. And like there's some cheap ones, right? Like Greedo, you pay 2 and you kind of have like a 2-cost removal, right? It hits something for 3, for 2. That's decent. There's like Starwing Scout is another one I thought of that it costs 3 normally. It's a 4/1. For 4, you get a 4/1 ambush in space. That also draws you 2 cards if you have initiative. All in all, I think the pool of relevant ambush units is not very large yet. And then there's like the elephant room here is this is a 4/4 for 5. Now, before you criticize me and tell me, wait, you like Kira, she's also a 4/4 for 5. Let me remind you, Kira front loads almost the entire use of her leader unit by basically deleting half the health of every unit in play, and also is more in the control archetype where you're not relying on that leader to kind of provide you immense value past that point. Fennec needs to not only like flip and survive before she can even use her action. A deck built around her likely wants her in play a little more so you can start playing these ambush units without taxing them. And I just don't see how a 4/4 in this world is going to survive very long. It's just we have precedent for that with IG-88. That leader was never able to take off competitively because it just instantly dies to way too many things. And I don't really yet see how this is going to be much different. But there's a little hope here just because of how powerful ambush is in general. I'm going to start pretty low on this, and then kind of wait to be convinced that a deck can really like function with her as a leader. All right, next is Fugitive Wookiee. Now this is a 2-cost 3/3 Wookiee in yellow, and it has a negative bounty, exhaust a unit. So when this dies, they get to exhaust one of your other units. I think this is pretty good. I mean, look, Battlefield Marine is an exception kind of to this whole rule. It's a 2-cost 3/3 that has no downside and also has relevant traits. This does not have a relevant trait, but it's in a relevant color, right? Like yellow tends to be pretty aggressive, was kind of missing pretty cheap aggro units. Now they got Dr. Evazan in villain, but Evazan has kind of a lose you the game style bounty on it, where this one, the bounty, it's not great, but it's not the end of the world. I think you can consider playing this for sure in yellow decks, especially ones that aren't going to rely too much on trait synergy. And right now that would be Underworld for the most part. That's where most of the yellow trait synergy is. But I think there's still room in yellow decks that do play Underworld synergy cards like McClunky to have a few non-Underworld units. And the first place I would look to play this would be in like a mono yellow Boba deck, just to get more cheap aggro units out. And I think it's pretty good. It's also like decent in Chewbacca, right? You get to play this as a pretty cheap Sentinel. So keep that in mind if you want to try yellow Chewie. All right, we got another Wookiee. It's a 4-cost in Heroism. It's a 2/5 with Grit. And has when played, if you control another Wookiee unit, draw a card. So 2/5 Grit is not a great stat line. And it's not in a color that can be played with Grand Inquisitor, so we don't have to think about that. It's a powerful when played. I mean, if you always were drawing a card with this, this would be pretty good. There's really not that many Wookiees right now. I mean, we've talked about a few today. One of them is the one we just talked about, the 3/3. There's also the 2/4 Grit. So it looks like Grit, obviously, is kind of a Wookiee thing in general. I think we're not going to play this card unless we have way more Wookiees, I don't think. The stats aren't very powerful. Drawing a card is nice, but if our curve is 2/4 Grit into 2/5 Grit, I mean, I think just most decks just run you over. So far, Wookiee.deck doesn't look like a thing, but this could definitely see play in a Wookiee.deck if that becomes a thing. All right. Black Sun Starfighter is a 3-cost villainous space unit. It's 3/2 with Sentinel and has Underworld. So this is like the space equivalent of the Cell Block Guard. I think it's a little better than Cell Block Guard because Space Sentinels are a little harder to come by. I don't think it's fantastic, and I think I'm not probably starting by jamming this in a bunch of decks. There's just too many space units now that like get through this without dying. There was always 7th Fleet Defender, Millennium Falcon. Now there's Punishing One, which is a punishing card. I don't think it's blocking enough, and when it does block, it's usually just trading, right? Like the 2-3 ships that it would block would just trade with it, and then you're kind of down a resource in that exchange. Even when it blocks an A-Wing, you're down a resource with that exchange. So there's some upside here because it's a 3-cost villainous card, so Darth Vader, the legendary unit, can drag this from your deck and put it into play. So that's like really what I ever like wanted to use Cell Block Guard for in my decks. It's never to play it on 3. It was always just to have a Sentinel in my deck that Darth Vader could pull out when he comes out. And this is one that could pop out in space. So it's, in that regard, I think a decent thing that you can think about including. But overall, I think the power level is pretty low. All right, Cloud Rider is a 2-cost 3/1. Has Underworld. It's in yellow, and it has Ambush. Cheapest ambush unit we have. We talked about how paying 2 to ambush a Greedo with Fennec would be pretty decent. Well, we can just pay 2 to ambush this guy in because it has Ambush on its own. It has Underworld, which, you know, like that synergy works nice with Cad Bane. You get a ping. It doesn't work too well with McClunky because generally if this is ambushing something, it's dying. But I think this card is pretty fantastic and incredibly hyped to play this with the Hero Boba, where this actually can ambush as a 4/1. That's pretty massive. It also lets us now have a 2-cost to ambush out of U-Wing reinforcements. So U-Wing, I believe, up until this card, was never able to pull out 2 units with ambush because we didn't have any that cost 2 or 3. So you could get like a 4-cost unit that has ambush. but then you wouldn't be able to get a second one. And this now lets us double ambush off of a Ewing. You play this. There's a bunch of others that cost 5 and 4 that we could ambush alongside it. And again, the Boba synergy is really, really strong with this because 4-1 ambush for 2. I mean, that's just removal. That's an open fire that costs 2 at that point. It's a very strong card. I like this. And next up is Enfys Nest. It's a 6-cost yellow unit. It's a 5/4 with Underworld. It also has Ambush. And it has, while a friendly unit, including this one, is attacking using Ambush, the defender gets -3/-0. So when this ambushes something, it's probably going to live, right? Unless it's ambushing something that has 7 or more power, it's going to shrink it enough to survive. And then if this is in play and you start ambushing more, those units will also get a benefit from that ability. But the primary mode of this is it survives the first ambush, which is something really important for your ambush units. It's kind of the whole point of ambush is to create 2-for-1s. That's how you get ahead with them. You kill something, they stay in play, and now they demand an answer. This, once again, tremendous in the Boba hero because it would then ambush for 6. Now, ambushing as a 5 power for 6 cost is not that exciting when we have this exact stat line for 1 cheaper with Syndicate Lackey, which also is not always super exciting. And we have other ambush units that cost 6, like Mercenary Company is a 5/5 Overwhelm ambush, and Rogue Skirmisher is a 4/6 ambush. Neither of those are particularly core cards. I know they see some play, but they're not incredibly pushed. And I think without the Boba hero bumping this up to a 6 power, this also might not be quite good enough, but I think it's absolutely fantastic with Boba leader. And I think there's definitely a deck in the making that is a yellow-green Boba hero deck that has ambushes all across the curve. And this will play a major role in those decks because, again, you need to be able to ambush and stay in play throughout the curve. That's the only way you ever get ahead. If you start ambushing units and losing them immediately, you're never going to get ahead of like aggressive decks. So this is going to help a lot in those scenarios. All right, the Darksaber. We got a legendary here. It's a 4-cost green upgrade attached to a non-vehicle. While playing this upgrade on a Mandalorian unit, ignore the aspect penalty. So you can play this in non-green decks if you have Mandalorians in that deck, and then you can just put this on a Mandalorian without paying a tax. It also has attached unit gains on attack, give an experience token to each other friendly Mandalorian unit, so not to the unit attached with it, but all your other stuff. And here's the big kicker, it gives +4/+3. That's big. It's a big upgrade. A really big upgrade. And I think first place you got to look is Sabine. Sabine is a Mandalorian. She comes out on 4 resources before most decks have an opportunity to interact with her. And you slap this on her. She becomes a 6/8 that now also pings when she attacks, and also spreads experience around. So if we start pushing more Mandalorians in a Sabine deck, that can also be the benefit, but again, I think the primary mode here is just this makes something absolutely enormous. There is like blowout potential here, right? It's an upgrade, and it's a very expensive upgrade. Upgrade removal will hit this pretty hard. Removal for the unit that you put this on. Now, like damage-based removal probably wouldn't cut it for the most part. This is bumping things up really big. But you'll have to be a little concerned about playing this into like villain blue decks, especially later in the game when they have both power of the dark side and something like Rivals Fall. We know that cards like Jedi Lightsaber and Fallen Lightsaber are pretty decent cards. I think Jedi Lightsaber, if it was in a color that Sabine, like a Sabine deck, was playing right now, you'd probably run it in without even the Jedi synergy, right? I think you'd probably just play a +3/+3 upgrade on her. That would it's kind of why we play Wing Leader in those decks. Well, not the entire reason we play Wing Leader, but it's a huge benefit to something like Wing Leader. And I think just bumping up Sabine would be with something like a Jedi Lightsaber would be really good. But we can't play Jedi Lightsaber because Blue Sabine, never really cut it. But we can play this in any Sabine deck, even if we're not playing green. And it's going to be pretty strong. It might be a card that you'd consider sideboarding out after game 1 when you expect people to start bringing in upgrade hate, because again, it would be pretty devastating to just like play this and get 0 value out of it. But I think you're likely to get at least 1 attack off, and like in many cases I think 2, and that's going to put 8 damage into something, likely your opponent's base. I think this card's pretty good. Card's legendary. I think it's going to be a pretty good legendary. I know overall some people have not been super impressed with the legendaries in this set yet, but I think this is one that you should probably be happy to open. Oh, another legendary. Endless Legions. It's a 14 cost double green event. It says reveal any number of resources you control. Play each unit revealed this way for free, 1 at a time. So this is the most expensive card in the game right now. Alright, basically this is supposed to say 14 costs win the game. If you're playing this for 14 and not winning the game, you did something very wrong in your deck construction, because I'm just going to like create very simple scenarios here. At 14 resources in your resource row, you should likely have about 60 resources worth of units. Some of these units should probably be healing your base. Some of them should probably be removing units, either with stuff like ambush or out and play effects. You should probably have stuff like Regional Governor or Relentless to block the only card that could actually beat you after you play this, which is Super Laser Blast. So you would need something to like prevent that. Yeah, like you need to prevent Super Laser Blast, and you need to prevent yourself from dying immediately after playing this. But I think with 60 resources worth of units, Sentinels and heals and removal units and whatever, like that's going to happen. So let's just pretend this says 14 win the game, because that's what it should say. How often can we get to 14? When we have a deck filled with random units that make us not lose the game when we play this. I think the odds are very low. I don't think this is very good, but it's very fun. Look, double green has a bunch of ramp. If you wanted to play this outside of double green, it would cost 16. What's the difference at that point? 14, 16, 18, 20. I think you basically have stalled the game out. I mean, the trick might be, how do you not win before you get to 14? Like, if you're going to get to 14, how did you not already win? You could have been playing capital ships for like 6 turns in a row at that point. But I don't know, like maybe as like a sideboard card into like attrition matchups. But I feel like those attrition matchups now play Spark of Rebellion in their deck. At least they do in the current form. So like they'll just take this out of your hand. So I don't know. It looks pretty fun. Like I kind of want to try it. I'm just like incredibly skeptical. Also, Galactic Ambition does not work with this. That only brings out units. I had to remind myself of that. All right, another leader, Gar Saxon, is a blue villain. He's a 6-cost deploy. His leader side is simple. Each friendly upgraded unit gets +1/+0. His leader side, he has Imperial and Mandalorian and official traits. He has the same ability. Each friendly upgraded unit gets +1/+0. And then they also gain a when defeated effect. You may return an upgrade that was attached to this unit to its owner's hand. So you get a little upside at that point when you deploy him. But that part I think is actually pretty minor. I think the main thing about this guy is that he's buffing all your upgraded units. So is the trick to play a bunch of upgrades? I think not. I think the trick is likely just to play a bunch of shielded units. So I'm not the first person, I don't think, to come up with this idea, but I think you just play this with yellow right now, and you get like Crafty Smuggler and 7 Fleet Defender and Dr. Eva's in. You get a bunch of these, like those units are absolutely absurd when they come into play with a +1 power. Some other nifty things with yellow is Snapshot Reflexes giving +2/+1. It's really nice. The Hotshot Blaster giving +3/+0 from your resource row. Also very nice. Now remember, these upgrades don't stack, so if you did like a Snapshot Reflexes on a 7th Fleet Defender that still had its shield, it was already getting the buff from the shield, so it was a 4/2. It's not going to become a 6/2 when you Snapshot, right? It'll be a 5/2. But those shielded units do sometimes lose their shields, and then they shrink. So you have to remember that. Another interesting, like there are some other interesting upgrades to play, right? I mean, Dark Saber works with this guy. You could look at more Mando-centric units and then stick Darksaber in that deck, even if you're not playing green. There's another Mando we'll talk about a bit later that I think works decently well with Gar Saxon also. But yeah, I like this guy. I think the ability is just clean, right? Like it's just powerful, and it's not overly reliant on like his deploy. You're getting a lot of benefit just from him being your leader. It's free. You don't have to exhaust them. You don't have to meet any condition. I just think mostly right now, we're not really looking at spamming like 12 upgrades in our deck. We're just looking at units that come into play with upgrades. So I would also look at things that give experience. There are some in green, for instance, that do that, like the TIE Fighter, I think Outland, Vanguard, that gives an experience when it comes into play. So that experience would give +2, +1. There's oh boy, I forgot the name of it. It costs 4. It's a 3/2 that gives 2 experience to an Imperial unit. TIE Advanced. I think that would be maybe decent if you've got a bunch of Imperials in a deck, right? You would get +3, +2 from that TIE Advanced instead of +2, +2. But overall, I think this guy's pretty good. Yellow would be the first place I'd look to play him. All right, Brutal Traditions. It's an upgrade. It costs 2. It's in Villain Blue. It gives the unit +1, +2. And then it has an action. If an enemy unit was defeated this phase, play this upgrade from your discard pile, paying its cost. So once this ends up in your discard, it's still available to you to play if you meet that condition. Now, the upgrade itself is understated. We have like Academy Training in green. Gives +2, +2. It has no text, so this is a little worse than that on its front side. Now, it does give +2, +2 in a Gar Saxon deck, and I think that's probably an interesting place to play it. I likely would just play like one of this. I don't think it's very good, but I think just having access to an upgrade from your discard pile is nice, and that's mostly it. I wouldn't want to be spamming these. They're not very good upfront value, but as recursive value, when they don't cost you a card, they become a little more interesting. All right, Clan Saxon Gauntlet is a 6-cost Villain Blue spaceship. It has the Mandalorian trait. It's a 4/5 Sentinel, and then it has, when this unit is attacked, you may give an experience token to a unit before the damage is dealt. So, all right, 4/5 space unit with Sentinel for 6 is not cutting it, but it's mostly better than that, because if they're going to attack into this, it immediately will trigger the ability, and they have to attack into it if they want to get through it, unless they're going to remove it. If it can give itself the experience immediately, so it becomes a 5/6. In a Gar Saxon deck, it would actually become a 6/6, which is a magic number for instantly defeating a fire spray. So I don't think you're going to see many Fet's fire sprays attacking into this unless they have a shoot first. And it can also, spread out the experience. Now, I think it's not going to get like attacked too often unless like your opponent's just like, I have the 2 ships, I have to sacrifice them into this. At which point you might get some value just by spreading experience out on some other units. Where the weakness mostly lies is that on its, like, when it comes into play, it's a 4/5, right? 4/5 immediately puts it in takedown range. It actually can get bounced by Cunning, which is pretty devastating. It's a big reason I think Obi-Wan is basically unplayable against mono yellow Boba, is because in addition to like waylays and Cantina bouncers, Cunning would also bounce it, and that would absolutely blow this out too. I think the card's pretty decent. We don't really have like this like mid-rangey Space Sentinel. We had like System Patrol Craft, but that costs 4. It's pretty small. There's like big Sentinels, right? You got like Devastator, you got Redemption in Hero. You got like the Gladiator Star Destroyer, but that's temporary Sentinel. This is a permanent Sentinel. It's a decent effect, and I think against some decks it certainly will be good. I think at some decks it will certainly be very bad. Whether or not that means main deck, sideboard, or not really good enough, I'm kind of torn on this one. I'm not sure yet. All right, next is Pre-Vizsla. 7-cost Villain Red unit. It's a Mandalorian Trooper. It's an 8/7. It has a when played and an on attack, so happens both times. You may pay the cost of an upgrade attached to another non-vehicle unit. If you do take control of that upgrade and attach it to this unit if able. If you can't attach it to this unit, defeat it instead. So, first of all, when you play this for 7 and you don't have any resources left over, it can steal something like a shield or an experience token because those have no cost. And then to steal anything that does have a cost, you would have to have that buffer in resources, or you would have to wait until the next turn, at which point you can attack and then pay to steal those things. Now, this unit is very big. It's bigger than like the most of the 7 costs, right? This is like the keyword big here. It's similar to 97th Legion, right? That is a 7 cost that comes in as a 7/7, but then it will keep growing as you play more resources. This guy is really large. I think the when played is fairly weak. I don't think, especially on the turn you play it, you're likely not going to have a bunch of resources to steal some relevant upgrade. Like, sure, they have a Dark Saber, but you would need 11 to steal a Dark Saber when this comes into play. Similarly, on attack, right, I don't love my 7 cost units needing to like ready up and then attack to get value. The fact that this is massive is nice, but it doesn't have overwhelm. So if you're going to need to be clearing units, you're going to be wasting a lot of his power, most likely. I think you mostly want a unit like this to go face, but this is such a slow card to be playing in an aggressive strategy because you basically would be spending 7 to do nothing impactful. I don't think this card is very good at all, actually. I think it would take a ton to make this better than available 7 cost units, whether they're Maul or Vader or Dooku or any of like the big monsters that we play already. I just don't think it stacks up in power level there. I think even if you steal a shield with this, like, it's nice, but I'm not sure that's even good enough to be playing a 7 cost that does nothing else when you play it. Yeah, I don't think it's going to see a ton of competitive play. All right, next is Fen Rao. This is a 6 cost, 5/6 in blue. It's Mandalorian. Has a when played, you may play an upgrade from your hand. It costs 2 less. And then when you play an upgrade on this unit, give an enemy unit -2/-2 for this phase. So for 6 and making something cost 2 less, so we start looking at upgrades that cost 2 or less to play immediately. And that's kind of where you want to start. You can play Entrenched immediately, right? You don't have to play it on this unit, but you do only get the extra debuff when you do. And remember, like if you played Snapshot Reflexes, no, this does not get to attack because it does enter play exhausted. But I think being able to like cheat out an upgrade is decent. I think my favorite one to play with this would be Lethal Authority currently. That's the capture upgrade. So you could immediately play this on this unit. This unit would then become a 5/8. It would be a 6/8 if you had Gar Saxon in play. And then Lethal Authority would let you steal something, like capture something. And then you would also get to do a -2/-2 on a unit. And if you wanted to get really spicy, you could do the -2/-2 first before the Lethal Authority. So you could shrink something like a Darth Maul. No, sorry, not Darth Maul, just Maul. And then steal it with Lethal Authority because Lethal Authority checks power. And this would now have more power than that unit. So I think that's a pretty impactful turn, being able to play this unit, give it a health buff and capture a unit, potentially capture unit and kill a unit if there's something small in play that the -2/-2 would hit. Yeah, I think that's pretty spicy. And on top of that, this comes out the same turn Gar Saxon would. So if you were playing Gar Saxon with green, you could flip him right after. And then if they do get through Fen Rao, that Lethal Authority would be coming right back to your hand because of Gar Saxon's ability. All in all, I think this card's decent. I don't think there's like a ton of other like super duper like amazing upgrades to do. I mean, Entrenched is nice. You can use like Entrench, especially if you were going to use it as removal. You'd like play this body, entrench something else, and then you've like added to your board and removed something from theirs. That's pretty cool. There's more expensive upgrades for sure. So like if you're going to play this later in the game, you'll have more of that buffer. But yeah, I think that card's pretty good. Look at Lethal Authority. That would be my first recommendation. All right, last card for today. Housecast Soldier is a 2-cost red unit. It's a 2/3 Mandalorian Trooper. It has Saboteur. This card's decent. It's like nothing fancy. It has the Mandalorian trait. So like, you know, we had Rebel Pathfinder. That was the Rebel version of this. It was a Rebel Trooper. This is the Mandalorian version. It does have Trooper as well. So there are a few cards that have Trooper synergy, like General Tag. But overall, like I think you'd really want the Mandalorian thing. So like Bo-Katan, right? If you have this in a Bo-Katan deck, this attacking would get you your ping from Bo's leader ability. Saboteur seems to be decently relevant with shielded units running around potentially. So I think this could make the cut as a 2-drop in a Mandalorian deck. It is not a fancy card. It's just like decent. All right, that's all I got. Hope you enjoyed it. Please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and I'll catch you next time.